The Beetle by Richard Marsh. Chapter 34. After 20 Years. How I reached the open air I cannot tell you. I do not know. I have a confused recollection of rushing through vaulted passages, through endless corridors, of trampling over people who tried to arrest my passage, and the rest is blank. When I again came to myself, I was lying in the house of an American missionary named Clements. I had been found at early dawn, stark naked in a Cairo street, and picked up for dead. Judging from appearances, I must have wandered for miles, all through the night. Whence I had come, or whither I was going, no one could tell. I could not tell myself. For weeks I hovered between life and death. The kindness of Mr. and Mrs. Clements was not to be measured by words. I was brought to their house a penniless, helpless, battered stranger, and they gave me all they had to offer, without money and without price, with no expectation of an earthly reward. Let no one pretend that there is no Christian charity under the sun. The debt I owed that man and woman I was never able to repay. Before I was properly myself again, and in a position to offer some adequate testimony of the gratitude I felt, Mrs. Clements was dead, drowned during an excursion on the Nile, and her husband had departed on a missionary expedition into Central Africa, from which he never returned. Although, in a measure, my physical health returned, for months after I had left the roof of my hospitable hosts, I was in a state of semi-imbecility. I suffered from a species of aphasia. For days together I was speechless, and could remember nothing, not even my own name. And when the stage had passed, and I began to move more freely among my fellows, for years I was but a wreck of my former self. I was visited at all hours of the day and night by frightful, I know not whether to call them visions, they were real enough to me, but since they were visible to no one but myself, perhaps that is the word which best describes them. Their presence invariably plunged me into a state of abject terror, against which I was unable to even make a show of fighting. To such an extent did they embitter my existence that I voluntarily placed myself under the treatment of an expert in mental pathology. For a considerable period of time I was under his constant supervision, but the visitations were as inexplicable to him as they were to me. By degrees, however, they became rarer and rarer, until at last I flattered myself that I had once more become as other men. After an interval, to make sure, I devoted myself to politics. Thenceforward I have lived, as they phrase it, in the public eye. Private life, in the peculiar sense of the term, I have had none. Mr. Lessingham ceased. His tale was not uninteresting, and, to say the least of it, was curious, but I still was at a loss to understand what it had to do with me, or what was the purport of his presence in my room. Since he remained silent, as if the matter, so far as he was concerned, was at an end, I told him so. I presume, Mr. Lessingham, that all this is but a prelude to the play. At present I do not see where it is that I come in. Still, for some seconds he was silent. When he spoke his voice was grave and sombre, as if he were burdened by a weight of woe. Unfortunately, as you put it, all this has been but a prelude to the play. Were it not so, I should not now stand in such pressing want of the services of a confidential agent, that is, of an experienced man of the world, who has been endowed by nature with phenomenal perceptive faculties, and in whose capacity and honour I can place the completest confidence. I smiled. The compliment was a pointed one. I hope your estimate of me is not too high. I hope not, for my sake as well as for your own. I have heard great things of you. If ever man stood in need of all that human skill and acumen can do for him, I certainly am he. His words aroused my curiosity. I was conscious of feeling more interested than heretofore. I will do my best for you. Man can do no more. Only give my best a trial. I will, at once. He looked at me long and earnestly. Then, leaning forward, he said, lowering his voice perhaps unconsciously, "The fact is, Mr. Champnell, that quite recently events have happened which threaten to bridge the chasm of 20 years, and to place me face to face with that plague spot of the past. At this moment I stand in imminent peril of becoming again the wretched thing I was when I fled from that den of all the devils. It is to guard me against this that I have come to you." I want you to unravel the tangled thread which threatens to drag me to my doom, and, when unravelled, to sunder it, for ever, if God wills, in twain.' 'Explain.' To be frank, for the moment I thought him mad. He went on. 'Three weeks ago, when I returned late one night from a sitting in the House of Commons, I found on my study table a sheet of paper on which there was a representation, marvellously like, of the creature into which, as it seemed to me, the woman of the songs was transformed, as I clutched her throat between my hands. The mere sight of it brought back one of those visitations of which I have told you, and which I thought I had done with for ever. I was convulsed by an agony of fear, thrown into a state approximating to a paralysis both of mind and body. But why? I cannot tell you. I only know that I have never dared to allow my thoughts to recur to the last dread scene, lest the mere recurrence should drive me mad.' 'What was this you found upon your study table? Merely a drawing?' 'It was a representation, produced by what process I cannot say, which was so wonderfully, so diabolically, like the original, that for a moment I thought the thing itself was on my table.' 'Who put it there?' 'That is precisely what I wish to find out, what I wish you to make it your instant business to ascertain. I have found the thing, under similar circumstances, on three separate occasions on my study table, and each time it has had on me the same hideous effect.' 'Each time after you have returned from a late sitting in the House of Commons?' 'Exactly.' 'Where are these what should I call them, delineations?' 'That, again, I cannot tell you.' 'What do you mean?' 'What I say. Each time, when I recovered, the thing had vanished.' 'Sheet of paper and all?' 'Apparently, though on that point I could not be positive. You will understand that my study table is apt to be littered with sheets of paper, and I could not absolutely determine that the thing had not stared at me from one of those. The delineation itself, to use your word, certainly had vanished. I began to suspect that this was a case rather for a doctor than for a man of my profession, and hinted as much. Don't you think it is possible, Mr Lessingham, that you have been overworking yourself, that you have been driving your brain too hard, and that you have been the victim of an optical delusion?' 'I thought so, myself. I may say that I almost hoped so. But wait till I have finished. You will find that there is no loophole in that direction.' He appeared to be recalling events in their due order. His manner was studiously cold, as if he were endeavouring, despite the strangeness of his story, to impress me with the literal accuracy of each syllable he uttered. 'The night before last, on returning home, I found in my study a stranger.' 'A stranger?' 'Yes, in other words, a burglar.' 'A burglar? I see. Go on.' He had paused. His demeanour was becoming odder and odder. 'On my entry he was engaged in forcing an entry into my bureau. I need hardly say that I advanced to seize him, but I could not.' 'You could not? How do you mean you could not?' 'I mean simply what I say. You must understand that this was no ordinary felon. Of what nationality he was I cannot tell you, he only uttered two words, and they were certainly in English, but, apart from that, he was dumb. He wore no covering on his head or feet. Indeed, his only garment was a long dark flowing cloak, which, as it fluttered about him, revealed that his limbs were bare. A unique costume for a burglar. The instant I saw him I realised that he was in some way connected with that adventure in the Rue de Rabagas. What he said and did proved it to the hilt.' 'What did he say and do?' 'As I approached to effect his capture, he pronounced aloud two words which recalled that awful scene, the recollection of which always lingers in my brain, and of which I never dare to permit myself to think. Their very utterance threw me into a sort of convulsion.' 'What were the words?' Mr Lessingham opened his mouth, and shut it. A marked change took place in the expression of his countenance. His eyes became fixed and staring, resembling the glassy orbs of the somnambulist. For a moment I feared that he was going to give me an object lesson in the visitations of which I had heard so much. I rose, with a view of offering him assistance. He motioned me back. 'Thank you, it will pass away.' His voice was dry and husky, unlike his usual silvern tones. After an uncomfortable interval he managed to continue. 'You see for yourself.